When you stop reaching out to a man, you're not just giving him breathing room, you're flipping his entire world upside down. Let me share something nobody wants to admit about what truly happens when you go silent on a guy. Everyone assumes that when you stop reaching out to a man, he just feels relieved, like he got exactly what he wanted, like now he's free and happy about it. But here's the real truth. When you actually stop contacting a man who was getting your attention, four specific things start happening inside his head that he never saw coming. These things happen whether he likes it or not, and they completely change how he thinks about you, about himself, and about what was going on between the two of you. Here's what people get wrong. You've been told that when you stop contacting a man, he celebrates, that he wanted space anyway, that guys love it when women pull back. You've heard that going quiet is just playing games, that he'll see right through it and lose interest, that if a man really liked you, your silence wouldn't matter because he'd just reach out himself. But all of that misses what's actually happening in his head when the attention he was getting suddenly vanishes, when you stop contacting a man, when you're not the one showing interest anymore, when you're not giving him what he'd grown used to. His mind doesn't throw a party. His whole way of thinking starts falling apart in ways he doesn't understand and definitely didn't expect. This isn't about games or tricks. This is about what happens in a guy's mind when someone who made him feel good suddenly stops doing that, how his brain reacts when a woman who was giving him attention stops, and how everything inside him gets shaken up when he realizes he's not getting something he didn't even know he needed. When you stop contacting a man, his whole view of himself starts getting questioned, and all that questioning creates thoughts and feelings that are totally different from what happens when you're still giving him attention. The problem is everyone treats silence like it's simple. You stop texting and either he'll chase you or he won't. But real silence, the kind that actually messes with a guy's head, works far deeper than that. When you become the person who stopped giving him attention, when you're not making him feel wanted anymore, when you're not there boosting his ego, his whole mental world changes. And that change creates things that normal dating advice never talks about. So stay with me here. Don't click away, because what you're about to hear will completely change how you understand what your silence actually does to a man and what's really going on in his mind when you're not there anymore. You'll find out why guys who seemed fine suddenly aren't, why your absence creates problems he didn't see coming, and exactly what's happening in his mind when he realizes the attention he was getting is gone. Let's get into it. Before we talk about the four specific things that happened to him, you need to understand how a guy's brain deals with losing attention he'd gotten comfortable with. This isn't complicated. This is just how people work. When you stop contacting a man, when you stop being the one who reaches out, his brain has to deal with real changes. The good feelings he was getting from your attention stop coming. His stress rises because something he could count on suddenly became unpredictable, and his brain starts working overtime trying to figure out what changed and why. These things don't just sit there quietly. They change how a man feels all day long. How confident he feels shifts. His mood shifts. How he sees himself gets shaky. And here's the important part. Most guys have no clue this is happening. Men aren't taught to notice their feelings or pay attention to how they feel inside. They're taught to just push through things, stay tough, not dwell on emotions too much. So when you stop contacting a man, when that good feeling he was getting from you disappears, most guys don't understand right away why they suddenly feel off. They just know something's different, and it bothers them far more than they expected. When you stop contacting a man, his whole focus gets rearranged around you not being there anymore. Think about how feeling good about yourself normally works. We get those good feelings from different things during the day. Doing well at work, friends laughing at what we say, people paying attention to us, small wins that make us feel okay. But when someone who was making you feel good suddenly stops, that leaves a gap. And his brain doesn't just forget about that gap. It notices it constantly. He's at work and he realizes you haven't texted. He's hanging out with friends and he notices his phone hasn't shown your name. He's going through his day and part of his brain keeps noticing that the good feeling he was getting from you isn't there. This isn't him choosing to think about it. It's his brain automatically noticing that something that made him feel good is missing. But here's where guys get tricky. Men are taught that needing a woman to make you feel good means you're weak. There's huge pressure on guys to not need anyone, to not care too much, to be fine on their own. So when a man notices that your silence is affecting him, when he realizes he actually misses the attention you were giving, it creates a fight in his head. Part of him feels the loss and wants that attention back. Another part tells him he's being pathetic for caring, that he should be fine without you, that needing your attention makes him less of a man. This fight makes everything worse because now he's not just dealing with missing your attention, he's also beating himself up for missing it. There's also how guys deal with losing control. When you stop contacting a man, he loses control over how things go between you. Before, when you were reaching out, he was in charge. He decided when to answer, how much to talk, whether to give you attention back. But when you stop, that control flips. Now you're deciding everything. You're the one choosing not to talk. And guys hate losing control, especially in dating. His brain starts scrambling to figure out how to get that control back, what he should do, whether he should reach out, what it means that you stopped. Another thing is the ego hit. When someone stops giving you attention, your ego takes it personally. It's not just she's busy or she's doing her own thing. Deep down, his ego starts asking harder questions. Why did she stop? Am I not good enough? Did she find someone better? Was I just not worth her time? These questions attack his sense of being wanted, being valuable, being someone women like. And for guys whose sense of worth often feels tied to women wanting them, this ego hit goes really deep. There's also the comparing he starts doing. When your attention stops, he starts measuring himself against other guys far more. If you're on social media and he sees you liking other guys' posts or talking to other people, his brain immediately jumps to she replaced me. That guy's better than me. I wasn't good enough. Even if you're not doing anything with anyone else, his mind builds these comparisons because your lack of attention makes him feel less valuable. And feeling less valuable makes him wonder who's more valuable than him. And finally, there's how getting used to something creates attachment. Even if he wasn't the one chasing, even if you were the one reaching out, he still got used to having you around in his head. Your messages were part of his day. Your attention was something he counted on. And people get attached to things they get regularly, even if they're not the ones making it happen. So when you stop, his brain doesn't just move on easily. It lost something it had gotten used to having. And that loss creates a reaction he didn't expect. The first thing that happens to him is this. His ego freaks out, and suddenly he needs to prove to himself that women still want him. This is one of the biggest signs of what happens in a guy's head. When you stop contacting him, when you pull back your attention, when you stop being the one who reaches out, his ego doesn't just accept it and move on. His ego starts panicking. And that panic creates a mental spiral where he suddenly needs proof that he's still someone women want. Here's why this happens. Men build a lot of how they see themselves around being wanted by women. It's not something they talk about, but it runs deep in how guys think. When a woman is giving a man attention, reaching out to him, showing she's interested, his ego takes that as proof that he's someone women want. It's like points in his head. This woman wants me, so I'm doing fine. I'm valuable. I'm someone women go after. But when you stop contacting him, when that attention goes away, his ego loses that proof. And losing proof that women want him hits harder than most people realize. Him triggers a meltdown inside. This ego panic shows up in specific ways in his mind. He starts replaying your last few talks, searching for what he did wrong, not really because he wants you back, but because he needs to figure out why he dropped in value. His mind asks things like, what did I do? When did she stop liking me? What made her stop seeing me as worth her time? These aren't genuine questions looking for real answers. They're ego questions trying to protect how he sees himself. The ego crisis also makes him start comparing himself to how he used to be. He thinks about times when women were chasing him, when he was getting attention, when he felt more desired, and compares that to where he is now. You stopping reaching out to those past moments makes him feel like he's getting worse, like he's losing his appeal, like he's not as good as he used to be. This comparing creates worry that sits in his head all day, making him feel less confident in general, not just about you. Another part of this is how guys become hooked on validation without even realizing it. When you were messaging him regularly, his ego was being fed. Every text from you was a small dose of, I'm wanted, women like me, I'm doing fine. His ego got attached to those doses. So when you stop, it's not just that the validation disappears, it's that his ego is going through withdrawal. It wants that validation back. It needs proof that he's still someone women want, and it starts doing mental gymnastics to find that proof. This is why his mind often drifts to other women, not necessarily because he wants them more than you, but because his ego needs new sources of validation to replace what you were giving him. He starts noticing other women more, thinking about texting exes, thinking about downloading dating apps, not because he's truly interested, but because his ego is desperate. His mind is trying to fill the gap you left by finding proof he's still wanted somewhere else. The ego crisis also makes him fixated on what you're doing. His mind keeps circling back to you because you're the reason he lost his sense of validation. He wonders if you're talking to other guys, if you found someone else, if you're happier without him, not because he cares about you specifically, but because his ego needs to understand why it lost value in your eyes. And not knowing makes the crisis worse because his mind fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios that make him feel even less wanted. What makes this really revealing is how it bleeds into everything else in his life. When a guy's ego goes into crisis, it shows up everywhere. He becomes more sensitive to rejection at work, he gets more defensive with friends, he looks for validation in other relationships more often. Naturally, the ego hit from you cutting contact spreads through his whole life because his basic sense of being wanted got shaken. Another way this shows up is in how he speaks to himself. Before you stopped contacting him, his inner voice about himself was probably fine, but after you stop, that voice turns harsh. Of course she stopped. You're not that interesting. You're losing your edge. Women don't chase you anymore because you're not worth chasing. This negative self-talk isn't grounded in anything real. It's his ego trying to make sense of why it lost validation, and the simplest answer is that he's the problem. The ego crisis also makes him test whether women still want him in odd ways. He posts more on social media to see who notices. He reaches out to old friends to see who responds. He might even try quiet ways to get your attention without directly messaging you, like checking your stories or liking old posts. All of this is his ego desperately trying to gather evidence that he's still wanted, still good enough, still someone women pursue. What's significant about all of this is that ego crisis in guys is delicate. Men are taught to never admit their ego is bruised, to never show they need validation, to never let on that a woman losing interest affected them. So all of this plays out quietly in his head. He won't tell anyone he's spiraling. He won't admit your silence hurt his ego, but it's there, running in the background of everything he does, creating worry and a need for proof that he hasn't lost his value. The second thing that happens is this. His brain starts inventing stories about why you stopped, and every story is about what's wrong with him. When you stop contacting a man, his mind doesn't simply think, oh, she's busy or she's doing her own thing. His brain goes into story building mode, and the stories it creates aren't fair or based on facts. They're almost always about him not being good enough, about him failing, and about why he wasn't enough. Here's why this happens. People's brains hate not knowing why something happened. When something shifts and we don't know the reason, our minds automatically start inventing explanations. It's how we're built, but in dating, this spirals out of control. When you stop contacting him and he doesn't know why, his brain demands an answer. And because guys are taught to blame themselves when things with women don't work out, his mind builds stories where he's the problem. This story building shows up in specific patterns in his head. His first story is usually, I wasn't interesting enough. He replays your conversations looking for moments when you seemed bored, when he said something dumb, when he wasn't funny or fun to talk to. He builds this whole story where you stopped contacting him because talking to him got dull, because he couldn't hold your interest, because he's just not that interesting. His second story is usually, I'm not good looking enough. Even if looks were never an issue, his mind goes there anyway. He starts thinking, maybe you realized you could do better. Maybe you saw someone who looked better than him. Maybe how he looks just wasn't what you wanted. This story attacks how he feels about his appearance and makes him more self-conscious about how he looks overall. His third story often becomes, I was too interested or I wasn't interested enough. His brain can't decide which one, so it bounces between both. Maybe he scared you off by being too available, too quick to reply, too eager. Or maybe he played it too cool and you thought he didn't care. His mind builds both stories at once, which makes him feel like no matter what he did, it was wrong. The story building also turns into comparing himself to other guys. His mind invents stories about you meeting someone better, someone funnier, more successful, better looking, more exciting. In these stories, he's not just not good enough. He's not good enough compared to some perfect guy he dreamed up who's everything he isn't. These comparison stories wreck his confidence because they make him feel fundamentally lesser. Another story his brain constructs is about timing. She was never really that into me. She was just bored. I was just something to do until something better came along. This story makes him feel used, temporary, not special. It makes your attention seem like it was never genuine, which means he was fooling himself the whole time. This story creates both hurt and embarrassment because it suggests he read everything wrong. What makes these stories really damaging is that he believes them, not because there's proof, but because his brain needs an answer. And these are the answers it hands him. Once his mind settles on a story, it looks for evidence to support it. He remembers that one time you didn't laugh at his joke. That becomes proof he's not funny. He remembers that one time you took a while to reply. That becomes proof you were losing interest even back then. His brain cherry-picks memories to prove whatever story it invented. The story building also affects how he behaves in future situations. If his mind decided you stopped because he wasn't interesting enough, he goes into new situations worried he's boring. If his mind decided he came on too strong, he pulls back with new people. Even when pulling back doesn't make sense, these stories become beliefs about himself that shape how he acts going forward, even though they were never grounded in truth. Another part is how these stories create shame. Men are ashamed to admit they're hurt by a woman losing interest. So these stories stay locked in his head, eating at him, and he can't talk to anyone about them. He walks around carrying stories about not being good enough that nobody else knows about. And keeping them hidden makes them feel more true because they never get challenged. The stories also make him afraid to reach out. Even if part of him wants to contact you, his mind tells him, don't. She stopped for a reason. You'll just confirm whatever's wrong with you. So the stories his brain invented to explain your silence become the reason he stays silent too, which creates even more distance and more story building about what that distance means. What's significant about all of this is that inventing these stories shows deep insecurity. Confident guys might wonder why you stopped, but they don't spiral into stories about everything wrong with them. When you see a guy making up stories about what's wrong with him just because you stopped reaching out, it shows his sense of value was never that solid to begin with. Your silence simply exposed what was already there. The third thing that happens is this. His whole sense of control over his life gets thrown off, and suddenly he feels powerless in ways that stretch far beyond just you. When you stop contacting a man, something major shifts in how he feels about being in charge of his own life. His feeling of being in control gets broken. This is huge because guys build much of their identity around being in control, holding power, making things happen. But when you stop reaching out, that sense of control takes damage that affects everything. Here's why this happens. Before you stopped contacting him, even if he wasn't the one reaching out first, he still had control in how things went. He controlled how much he talked. He controlled when he replied. He controlled how interested he acted. That control made him feel stable, like he was making the choices. But when you stop, all that control vanishes. Now you're the one making the choices. You're deciding not to talk. You're controlling whether there's contact at all. And that flip from him holding control to you holding it creates a crisis in his sense of power. This control loss shows up in specific ways in his mind. He feels helpless, a feeling guys despise more than almost anything else. His brain keeps circling back to the situation with you, trying to figure out what he can do, how he can fix it, how he can get control back. But the answer is nothing. He can't make you contact him. He can't force your attention. He can't control whether you're interested. And realizing he's powerless in this situation creates anxiety that sits in his chest all day. The control loss also makes him question other areas of his life. If he can't even control whether a woman stays interested, what else can't he control? His mind starts doubting how good he is at work, how good he is with friends, whether he can make things happen in general. The specific loss of control with you turns into a general feeling of powerlessness that spreads into everything. He starts feeling less confident in meetings, less sure of himself around people, less certain he can handle problems. Another part of this is how losing control triggers shame in guys. Men are raised on the message that real men control situations, that power and control define being a man. So when a man loses control to a woman, when you're the one holding power because you decided to stop talking, it doesn't just feel bad. It feels like he failed at being a man. His mind tells him he messed up because he couldn't keep your interest, couldn't control how things went, couldn't make things go the way he wanted. This control loss also creates obsessive thinking. When you can't control something, your brain tries to control it mentally by dwelling on it constantly. He can't control whether you reach out, but his mind can replay every conversation, analyze every detail, plan what he'd say if you did contact him. This mental attempt at control becomes compulsive because his brain is trying to satisfy the need for control, even though real control isn't possible. The feeling of powerlessness also makes him more controlling in other relationships. When someone feels out of control in one area, they often try to grab control in other areas to compensate. He might get more controlling with friends, making all the plans, insisting on his way. He might get pushier at work, more aggressive in decisions, needing to be right. This isn't really about those relationships. It's about him trying to feel powerful again after feeling powerless with you. Another way this shows up is with his phone. He checks it constantly, not because he expects your message, but because checking feels like doing something. His brain builds this false idea that by checking his phone, he's somehow involved in whether you contact him, like he has some influence over it, but he doesn't. And every time he checks and finds nothing, it just reminds him he's powerless. The control loss also affects his decision-making. When someone feels powerless, they often freeze up about decisions. He can't decide if he should reach out or not. He can't decide if he should move on or wait. He can't decide what the situation even means. This freezing happens because his normal sense of being in charge is broken, and without feeling in control, making decisions feels impossible. What makes this really significant is that control loss in guys exposes vulnerability they can't handle. Men are taught to never be vulnerable, never admit being powerless, never show that someone else holds power over them. So when you stop contacting him and he feels this loss of control, it exposes vulnerability he doesn't have the tools to deal with. And that exposure makes everything feel worse because he can't even admit what's happening. The fourth thing that happens is this: his mind starts making you far more valuable than you actually were when you were around, and suddenly you become more important than you ever were before. When you stop contacting a man, something shifts in how he sees you. You go from being someone he was casually talking to someone his brain decides was actually really important. This is one of the clearest signs of what silence does to a guy's mind, because it shows that your value to him rises the moment you're no longer available.